This presentation covers principles of mating disruption in New York apple production. Mating disruption is a pest control tactic that involves the use of chemical pheromones. And the definition of a pheromone is a chemical released into the environment by one member of an insect population that has a behavioral effect on other members of the population. And just to affirm, other animals do use pheromones as well, but we'll restrict our discussion today on insects. There are two general mechanisms behind the way mating disruption operates. The objective, of course, of which is to disrupt communication between females, who are the senders, and males, who are the receivers, in moths. And generally, we're talking about moths when we are using mating disruption in apples. This disruption prevents them from mating and laying eggs, which can hatch out into the fruit-feeding larvae. So one mechanism is by inhibiting the male's ability to respond to the pheromone source. And this is usually through desensitizing the insect, or by camouflaging the female insects, or just by exhaustion as the males go from one false source of pheromone to the other. The other mechanism is through competition between the dispensers and the calling females. And this is a mechanism that is called competitive attraction. Now, pheromone products have become available in many formulations since the first days of their use in mating disruption back in the 1960s. As more and more companies enter the sector of providing mating disruption tools for pest management, they need to address a number of considerations in the development of effective pheromone products. One is the product's ability to release the pheromone over an extended period of time, and its ability to protect the active ingredient from degradation, which usually occurs via rainfall or UV radiation. Also important is its ease of application and whether it's affordable. And most importantly, the extent to which the product impedes the finding of females by males. Strategies behind pheromone distribution are related to the dispenser type and method of distribution. There are what are called densely distributed point sources, and this can range anywhere from 100 to 400 per acre, as seen in the hand-applied reservoir dispensers, to several hundred million release points per acre, as in the sprayables, the microcapsules or flakes or fibers. Then there are sparsely distributed point sources. This can range from just a few units per acre, the mega dispensers such as puffers, to approximately 20 to 40 devices per acre, which are termed meso dispensers and can take the form of plastic sachets and solid strips made of a composite matrix. There's a relationship between application density, emission rate, and pheromone distribution. Formulations with a higher deployment density tend to have a lower pheromone emission rate from each individual point source. Think of the sprayables, which have tiny microcapsules and, of course, can contain only a small amount of pheromone, compared with the lower density products. Densely applied formulations, like sprays, are distributed via the application process itself. That is, they're put in place by the sprayer or by hand in the case of ties and other hand-applied products. Sparse sources, such as puffers and misters, rely on wind or air movement to distribute the pheromone. Let's look at some examples of pheromone formulations available. First are the hand-applied reservoir dispensers. Now, these include some of the earliest developed products: twist ties, twin tubes, membranes, coils, and jigsaw pieces. In these products, the pheromone is enclosed in plastic or dispersed in a synthetic polymer, and it slowly diffuses from the reservoirs for quite a long period, as much as 180 days. These are hand applied at rates of often between 100 and 400 per acre, and each dispenser releases up to several micrograms of pheromone per hour. Now, one limitation to their use is the high labor requirement for application, which brings with it an associated cost. The disruption effect relies mainly on competitive attraction. Disruption is strongest when the competing sources, the pheromones, the dispensers themselves, greatly outnumber the number of females. Their efficacy is strongly related to the number of point sources. It's higher when the number is high, and population density, which is better when population density is low. Now, despite the fact that these are capable of a high degree of communication disruption, complete efficacy is often elusive. In practice, the most bang for the buck is obtained at somewhat lower application rates, so that growers often opt to use fewer dispensers, maybe 70 to 80% of the recommended rate, and then apply supplemental insecticides as needed, which is something that turns out to be standard in most situations. Then we have mesodispensers. These take the form of sachets or solid composite strips, and they represent an effort to incorporate the best qualities of reservoir dispensers, that is, extended period of effectiveness, but with a reduced application effort. They release considerably more pheromone than the standard hand-applied reservoirs, which can allow for much lower densities, possibly as few as 18 per acre, which means that less labor is required. And these employ a competitive attraction mechanism, but possibly they could also operate by desensitization. Sprayable dispensers include things like flowables and microencapsulated formulations. Here, the pheromone is encapsulated in microscopic polymer capsules, 20 microns average size, and these are sprayed on the crop, obviously at many millions per acre. They deliver collectively 8 to 40 grams of pheromone per acre over a 3 to 4 week period. Now, they're very easy to apply since they can go right in the spray tank, and so they have reduced labor costs. But they do have a short field life, and therefore more inconsistent efficacy is seen with these types of products. They show a rapid decline in release rate once they are applied, and they can be washed off by rain. It's been found that frequent low-dose applications are most effective when using these dispensers. And they operate via a non-competitive mechanism, probably desensitization or camouflage. Next, we have mechanically applied dispensers, and these include products such as microflakes, fibers, and wax-based droplets. These are designed to release pheromone at about the same rate as a calling female, so they're referred to as female equivalent formulations. These also use a competitive attraction mechanism, and they're relatively easy to apply compared with hand-applied dispensers, depending on the need for any specialized equipment. However, they may only divert males' attention away from calling females for a short period, allowing more opportunities for them to search for actual females. And finally, we come to mega dispensers, which include the puffers and misters. These are ultra sparsely distributed pheromone sources used at densities of 1 to 2 per acre. Typically, these are aerosol devices that release large amounts of sex attractants. Milligram quantities are released every 15 to 30 minutes over a 6 to 12 hour period each day. And they provide a controlled and constant release rate and a stable environment, which is the canister, for the pheromone prior to its release. Male captures within the pheromone plume are inhibited for considerable distances downwind of each device. However, lower employment density can leave areas with little pheromone coverage where mate finding can occur. In particular, orchard edges are a problem, so this approach tends to be more suitable for larger area mating disruption. say 20 acres or more. And in these cases, supplemental border treatment is advised. Now, sometimes mating disruption doesn't work as it should, and strategies for reducing mating disruption failures focus mainly on location. An area-wide approach is ideal, but a large square-shaped block can also be adequate, whereas an irregular rectangular planting is not appropriate. Block size, shape, and pest pressure are all important factors. A larger area is better, optimally 10 acres or more, although 5 acres may work for OFM. And square and rectangular is better than long and narrow. Lower efficacy tends to be seen under severe population pressure. Product selection and placement is another consideration, and different practices apply. For codling moth, dispensers are generally placed in the top 20% or so of the tree canopy, but for OFM, head height is acceptable. You want a uniform and extended release rate, so make sure that you have an appropriate number of point sources. Monitor using pheromone traps to check the effectiveness of your mating disruption program. You should be getting zero catch of moths in a disrupted block. Use an appropriate trap design for your target species. Traps should be placed in a representative location of the orchard, that is to say the interior and not the edge. Regular trap maintenance is needed to keep informed of the rate of moth catch. It's recommended that you use at least one trap for every 5 to 10 acres. Lure selection also plays a role in regards to longevity and release rate. There's a long-lasting 2X lure that's more convenient, and a newer lure for codling moth and mating disruption blocks. It's called the CMDA combo, which contains both the sex pheromone and a chiromone, which in this case is a plant-derived chemical, para-ester, used in this lure that attracts both the male and the female moths. And there are actually powerful 10X lures available for monitoring codling moth males in disruption blocks. But these should be used in combination with a trap having a regular lure in a comparison block to get a true picture of the moth population. Count on needing to use supplemental insecticide treatments since mating disruption is rarely a standalone tactic. And follow the trapping thresholds. Now, there are no real hard and fast moth capture thresholds for determining whether or not to spray an insecticide. However, provisional ballpark values of 5 codling moths per trap and 10 oriental fruit moths per trap are useful. And focus on border areas for control since pheromone dissipation is high at the orchard edge. This allows breakthrough. Some suggested management approaches for codling moth or oriental fruit moth problem blocks. First of all, monitor closely using pheromone traps. Time sprays according to degree days and trap captures, individually if necessary for each species, which means that sometimes a spray might be recommended for codling moth based on trap catches, even if OFM numbers are low. Use the higher recommended insecticide rates on the label. Tighten up spray intervals to avoid gaps in protection, and rotate insecticide chemistries between generations to prevent resistance. Consider that the use of mating disruption is a supplement when you use hand-applied dispensers or mechanicals or sprayables. And it's a good idea to incorporate in the real problem blocks granulosis virus product as a long-term tactic. And there are products available that are effective against both species, codling moth and oriental fruit moth.